Kinich is the brand new character coming to Genshin Impact for the second half of version 5.0, and just like Mualani, I do believe he is a character released before his time, that although he is quite strong and has a surprising amount of quite solid teams, he's a character that I believe will get even better with age. While not among the very top of the meta right now, I do believe Kinich is extremely fun and quite strong. So let's talk about whether or not you should get him, and how to make the most out of him if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Kinich has a very unique playstyle which revolves around you revolving around your opponent. Your elemental skill puts you in the Natlan state, aka the Night Soul Blessing state, and you will tether to the nearest opponent while you circle them and normal attack, and it's honestly extremely fun. I really like his playstyle a lot. While you're going around, you can kind of dodge enemies' attacks. While you use your skill, you're invulnerable to enemies' attacks, so although you'll take damage, it is very easy to avoid being knocked around and being staggered. He has interruption resistance built in already, so overall I think his playstyle is really fun. As you're circling your opponent, the bar alongside him will build up, and once it is full, you can press your elemental skill button again, which will unleash a big cannon shot, and that will deal a ton of damage. He has a passive that whenever a burgeon or burning reaction occurs, you will build up this bar faster, which allows you to get more cannon shots faster, so most of his teams will revolve around building up this meter more quickly. He has a second passive that when another party member triggers their Night Soul Burst, he will get additional damage going towards his cannon. Unfortunately, there's not really any characters right now that can actually activate this passive in full, so this is just one of the ways that he will get better with age. His other two passives give him great exploration in the overworld, particularly in Natlan, where along with Mualani, he is one of the premier units to enjoy yourself in the overworld. His elemental burst is quite good. It provides you some important dendro damage, which can contribute to the reactions you need to make more burning or burgeons. And the nice thing is when you use it, it pauses his elemental skill duration, meaning it doesn't use up time out of your DPS window. Normally characters like Mualani, for example, when you use her burst, her elemental skill duration's ticking down, so you have to use her burst before or after her elemental skill duration. But with Kinich, it's got this built in. This is very useful, and it would be great if all skill-based DPSs had this feature, so it's really nice that he does. One other thing to keep in mind is that there will be something called a blind spot, which is an area in Kinich's swing radius that is highlighted, and by entering the state, you restore some Night Soul points, which let you stay in your elemental skill duration longer. It's not a deal breaker if you miss these, but you want to aim for them when you can. Now on to Kinich's build guide. As a DPS, you will want to 90 him eventually, although he's not as high priority as other Dendro DPSs because he does his damage based on pure attack value, not based on EM based reactions. So if you need to prioritize level books, he's not the first that you'll probably want to level, but eventually definitely get him there. For his talents, you definitely want to focus on his skill and then his burst. If you're going to main Kinich, crowning his skill is worth it. Crowning his burst, probably not. I would save those resources for something else. You can leave his normal attacks completely gone. For his weapons, obviously his signature is the best, and it's an amazing looking weapon. Genshin has done an incredible job making better and better looking weapons. I am blown away consistently with their new weapon design. The pixel dancing thing is super sick, so I can definitely understand if you want to get it for that, but getting it for power is pretty good as well. It's a solid 16+% higher than the next best, which is the Beacon of the Reed Sea. I say plus because oftentimes a lot of other good claymores will be giving you crit rate, whether that be Beacon or the Serpent Spine. And yes, his signature does give him 11% crit rate, but that is the smallest percent crit rate I have ever seen on a weapon. And really what this weapon is all about is, yes, the high base attack, but the passive is absolutely stacked for him. It gives him essentially 60% elemental damage bonus, which is more damage bonus by a time and a half of what you get from a goblet. So yeah, this weapon's awesome for him, but you can always go with the Beacon if you don't have it, but you happen to have that. If you happen to use a Geo character, the verdict is excellent, but you're almost never going to be running a Geo character, and even if you're not running a Geo character, it is still pretty good because similar to his weapon, he has a very high base attack, very low crit rate, Not as crazy of a discrepancy as his signature, but still pretty solid stat stick for him, and at least it gives him some attack percent in the substat. If you have the Serpent Spine at R5, it is very, very close, but it's going to be hard to build with due to the lots of crit rate it gives. If you have Ito's weapon, the Redhorn Stone Thresher, that one also comes in pretty close, and since it gives lots of crit damage, at least you're not overcapping on your crit rate the way you do for these. If you don't have any of these, then the Natlan craftable weapon, which looks great on him, by the way. His signature weapon looks amazing too, but the Natlan craftable looks awesome, looks perfect for him, and it works quite well. At about 23% behind his signature, it is a standard 5-star weapon increase for this day and age. He will still easily 36-star, he'll still be perfectly good with the free-to-play weapon, and I know it might be tempting to use the Wolf's Gravestone or something else, but since it is worse than the free-to-play craftable, yeah, you can use it for now while you wait for enough billets or something, but eventually you want to go for this one, especially since it is at least free. For Kinich's artifacts, you will absolutely 100% need to go with the Obsidian Codex. This is the set that you'll be farming in. Until you farm it, you can go with a Deepwood Memory set, the Dendro one from Sumeru, and you can just not put someone else on the Deepwood set until later. So if you until you get his signature. So until you get a signature, you can run this, but you'll definitely want to be farming this. It just gives way too much crit rate, way too much damage. Truly an excellent set. Before we go into his team's guide, I did want to give a couple quick tips. When his skill duration is almost out, there's a 3-2-1 that appears above him. That means his skill duration is about to end, which is pretty cool. That something I've never seen done for any other character, but it gives you like a heads up that you're going to want to really try hard to get a final skill shot off, the cannon shot, before that countdown timer ends. So really cool to plan things out and plan out the last of your attack time. Remember that Bennett's buff lasts a bit outside the circle, so as you're swirling around trying to hit the special little zone to extend his timer, if you happen to launch your skill outside of Bennett's circle, as long as you were just in there, you should be catching the Bennett buff the majority of the time. Finally, as I already mentioned, the skill is uninterruptible, so if you need to iframe something, well, not really iframe, but if you need to not be staggered and you're in a healing circle like Bennett, or you can afford to take some damage, you can use your skill to plan to use your skill to block an incoming attack. Normally, you just want to fire your skill right away, but it's something you can consider if you want to not be staggered out of your movement for some reason. And also keep in mind that you want to go counterclockwise when you're playing with Xiangling. Xiangling's burst spins around your character, and if you go clockwise, then Xiangling's burst actually sometimes doesn't hit the enemy, and then it doesn't refresh the burning, it doesn't do damage. But if you spin counterclockwise, you're going to get extra ticks with Xiangling, so you're going to get additional value. It makes playing with Xiangling a little bit annoying. Sometimes you're going to want to go counterclockwise to get into the blind spot zone to extend your Night Soul duration, and Xiangling can ruin that. So you have to pick your poison in that moment, whether you want to lose some ticks with Xiangling or lose some Night Soul points. Usually you still want to get some Night Soul points, but it's hard to say. Now for the team's guide. Yes, I once again tortured myself testing 32 different teams for Kinich. I spent a ridiculously long time testing all the different possible variations I could think of that would be good, and also some that I didn't think would be good, but I did want to try them out anyways, just for science. And I will say it was worth it. I did come up with a bunch of teams that I definitely wouldn't have thought of at first glance, so I am really glad I did this, although it did take forever, because the only boss that was really suitable for testing was the Perpetual Mechanical Ray, which is the last boss on the second side of the abyss. So third chamber, second side. I had to run through the whole abyss with every single team. The benefit of this was I played a lot with Kinich, and I got a really good handle on him overall, and I got to play him against a lot of different enemies and against a lot of different abysses, because the first half of the abyss heavily dendro resistant, and the dendro chicken also has self-applies dendro to himself, which does screw with the team building, and you never play a dendro character against the chicken. So having this self-applying dendro that the Jade Plume Terror Shroom has is really just bad overall for testing. It completely ruins the integrity of the testing, so I went with this. One thing that I did want to talk about is when I was testing with Kinich, I accidentally left his weapon at level 70, which is obviously super embarrassing, and I tested all those 32 teams all with the level 70 weapon, and after I found that out as I was recording this, I couldn't believe it. So I went back into the abyss, I did a bunch more runs just to see what the difference would be, and honestly, I didn't actually get a difference with the perpetual mechanical array, at least very much, maybe a second. So a pretty small difference. I did sometimes notice a difference against the smaller mobs, and that's because the additional burst damage I got sometimes was enough to one-shot a mob when I normally wouldn't have been able to earlier. So I was able to get cleaner runs and more. It's sort of like a breakpoint thing where if you're able to one-shot an enemy, you can move on to another enemy and then one-shot that one and then move on to the next one. It can really drastically speed up your times. But against a boss like the perpetual mechanical array, you've got to hit the whole chunk of damage regardless. So even though I got a bit more damage, that was enough to make it so I didn't have to use like a second skill against an enemy. Against the perpetual mechanical array, it took a pretty much exactly one rotation for most of these teams. Any team with 20 to 23 seconds took one rotation or a bit longer. So a lot of these, so I'm sure some of these teams are better than others, like 20, 21, 22, 23. All of those teams are in the same ballpark because they all one rotated the enemy. So really, rather than looking at the time, which would be slightly different if you stretch it over a longer time or you do more accurate testing. It's not really about the time, but it does give you an indication of, oh yeah, this team performed pretty well. So with the disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. I would say my favorite team overall, believe it or not, and I might sound crazy, is the Bennett Dea team. The reason why I like this team so much is not only do you have great damage for both Emily and Kinich, Bennett is buffing Kinich a lot, and Dea is providing some off-field pyro application to keep the burning going, so you're getting lots of cannon shots, that pretty much the max that you can realistically get. Dea is also holding the Deepwood Memories artifact set and is reducing the resistance for Emily and Kinich, so that overall just sends the damage really high. If you're using Bennett Xiangling, theoretically, this should be better. But the problem is that if you want Emily and Kinich to be doing max damage, then Xiangling also has to be on the Deepwood Memories, and then she's pretty much losing all of your damage, and you might as well have someone like Dea increasing the interruption resistance, because that's obviously another thing that Dea does. Just make sure that you use Dea before you use Bennett, because although it's nice to get max interruption resistance uptime, it is more important to get max Bennett uptime for your Kinich. So this is overall my favorite team, but if you don't have Dea, Xiangling will do. I would also say that swapping that out for a similar team, which I know it's all the way down here, but using Xinyan also works actually. Xinyan's also going to be on the Deepwood Memory set, and it's cleared slightly slower, I guess, than these two, but that could have just been, just normal variance for clear times. So yeah, this Bennett, this Emily Bennett core with a pyro unit is good. You can also do Tomoe. This makes no sense that it should be this much slower. I must have forgot to put Tomoe on Deepwood Memories, so I'm going to put redacted because it just doesn't make sense. It should be around the same as the other two. There's no reason it wouldn't be. Tomoe's going to slightly increase his Kinich's normal attacks, but it doesn't really matter because most of his good damage comes from the skill. If you don't have Emily, no worries. You have another option. You can do Nahida. Nahida, you would think, of course, wouldn't do very well on a Kinich team, and it makes sense because she is obviously an EM buffer and she's better for those type of reactions, whereas Burning doesn't really care about EM. So you don't use Nahida's burst on this team, but what you do is you use Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer on her. Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer allows you to pass a big buff of attack to Kinich. So you'll want to start with Dea, then use Bennett, then use Nahida, then use Kinich. You will lose a bit of Bennett uptime, but it's somewhat made up for by the fact that you get the attack buff. I would say I don't like this as much as the Emily variations overall, just because it's nice to have a second character providing damage as well. But if your Kinich is really cracked, maybe you have some constellations or he's just really, really well built, then this could potentially even outperform the other one. But obviously, the more you invest in your Emily, the more that one will outperform, so it just depends on what you have. By the way, this is all the Bennett teams, so I do generally recommend him with Bennett. To not use Bennett is kind of shooting yourself in the foot just because he gives such a big attack buff. The fact that he's pyro doesn't I guess it's pyro resonance. You get some pyro resonance, which is nice, and you provide pyro energy to a lot of the other pyro characters that sometimes need energy. But overall, because he doesn't provide very much off-field pyro application, you still need another pyro to get more burning. He's kind of like Emily in that way. The next teams I really liked and went for outside of Emily were the Furina variants. So Furina, Bennett, Xiangling. This one you can kind of go two ways. You can build Xiangling on Deepwood, or you can do Furina, let Furina buff Xiangling and build Xiangling for damage. Both I found I got really similar results with, so you can try either one. Furina, Bennett, Dea, I actually got even better results. You're using Dea on Deepwood Memories, and Furina is buffing Kinich. It's a true hyper carry Kinich comp. It did really well. You can also go for a comfy Baizhu Bennett Xiangling. This time you go for Xiangling damage and you use Baizhu on Deepwood. It didn't feel quite as good, but it was still good. Nahida Bennett Xiangling, the reason why that didn't do as well as the Nahida Bennett Dea is because you have to waste even more Bennett uptime Xiangling bursting in the Bennett circle, so that's not really ideal. If you don't want to use Furina and you don't have Emily, then using Mona is a viable option. I feel like Mona has been getting better and better as a character these days. Once again, Mona's using the Thrilling Tales, and she's even using Deepwood, which is hilarious, and her low Hydro application, you are going to get some Burgeons, but it's not going to ruin burning completely because you've still got Xiangling and Kinich, so I still got quite good clears. I also tried a weird thing where I used an Electro like Yai or Fischl and just used Bennett Xiangling. Didn't really like it very much. I actually liked Yai better than Fischl a little bit because she doesn't have to set up her skill inside the Bennett circle like Fischl does, so you don't waste as much time. This difference is not a real difference. It's you needed to start another rotation, so that's why it took so much longer. And then Yanfei Bennett Xiangling, I tried to do the same thing. I used Yanfei later on to better success, but I tried to do a similar thing to the Nahida one where you use Thrilling Tales. Now for the Furina variants that don't use Bennett, there were 2 that worked out, 3 that didn't. Using Yayo in place of Baizhu was a no-go, using Siege Wayne was no-go, and using Charlotte was a no-go. I didn't like any of those very much. Furina, Baizhu, Xiangling, not too bad, but not that good either. Usable, but not insane. Same with Furina, Nahida, Toma. You're using Nahida on Prototype Amber for some healing. It's fine, but not insane. Non-Bennett burning. It was really tough to make this work properly. I can't in good conscience recommend any of them to get good clears. If you want to just 36 star, all 3 of these will work, but they won't work all that well. Just losing Bennett just really hurts. It just really hurts the clear times. But like this Abyss is also really easy, so all of these are 36 starring in well within the recommended time. Downing the PMA in 1 rotation when it's a 3rd chamber boss is impressive. So taking a rotation and a half to 2 rotations is, you know, not that bad. It's just that you generally want to be using Bennett with Kinich, and even though I tried to be creative and tried everything else, it was hard. It was hard to do. I did of course try Kinich Hyper Bloom because of course I did. Furina, Nahida, Kuki, you've got Furina buffing Kinich, and then you're just really slow to build up your stack. So eventually you do build up a skill and you do some damage, but you're also getting the Furina buff to your normal attacks, and then you're getting Nahida on Prototype Amber along with Kuki doing some healing for Furina, and then Kuki's activating Hyper Blooms. It did all right. It did better than a bunch of the other teams. Didn't do as well as any of the Bennett teams, but it came pretty close to some of the Bennett teams, so not bad. And then I also tried basically Alhaitham's spread team with Kinich, Yai, Zhongli, and Nahida, and it didn't perform very well. I wouldn't recommend that. If I had been able to, I forgot to refill my energy before the 3rd chamber. If I had energy, probably saves us a good 3-4 seconds, as she can get one burst off, but it's still nothing to write home about that I didn't want to bother trying again. I tried a bunch of other weird stuff. I tried like Kinich National with Yolan or Sing Cho, hoping for some Burgeons, but I guess just his Dendro application, maybe it's not enough. That couldn't really get enough Dendro. I tried a Hyper Bloom with Yolan instead of Furina, but Furina was really doing a lot of heavy lifting to buff Kinich on that team, so that didn't really work out. And then using Xingqiu for the Hyper Bloom, yeah, that didn't work. That didn't work either. So that is the 32 teams I tested with Kinich, and the answer is you have to use Bennett. And this is where I kind of want to talk about his future potential, because when we look at all of the teams, like the first category is the Bennett ones, and pretty much any team that you put Bennett on him, as long as you have an off-field pyro applicator, it's a good team. Like all of these teams are excellent, and then sometimes with other pyro applicators you can still be good. So really what he's looking for is a better Bennett. And I'm kind of curious because right now we have Mavuika coming, but Mavuika seems like it feels like she should be a Xiangling replacement. What I've been saying is that she'll be a Xiangling plus Bennett. And then we got Mualani, who doesn't scale with attack. So that if Mualani worked with Mavuika, which I would expect, because Mualani is also desperate for an off-field power applicator, she wouldn't benefit from the attack buff that hypothetically a Bennett replacement would give. So I'm wondering, you know, are we going to get both a Bennett replacement and a Xiangling replacement? Are they both going to be in one character and they're just going to buff Kinich more than Mualani? I do think Mualani is like a bit stronger than Kinich right now. While we're on that topic, let's next go into Kinich's overall value and power level based on those teams. Don't want to spoil that too soon. So I'm personally pretty confident on my top 3 DPSs right now. I think Neuvillette is number 1, and number 2 is something of a tie between Mualani and Arlecchino. I think both of them have some pros. I think all of them have pros and cons. None of them are strictly above all the others. Mualani, I've been able to get the fastest clears with out of anyone. Not just this Abyss, which does give a huge buff to Natlan characters. That's something that's important to mention. But when we're comparing Mualani and Kinich in this Abyss, they both get the same huge buff. So it's not, it doesn't hurt the comparison in that way. But in the last Abyss, Mualani didn't get a particularly higher buff than other characters did. But yeah, I do find that Neuvillette's the best overall, but his single target isn't as good as Mualani's or Arlecchino's. So these I would consider the top 3. And then below them, I would consider all of the others. So Alhaitham, Linny, Hu Tao, Clorand, Navia, I would consider, and some others, I would consider those to be the other DPSs. And I kind of feel like Kinich, it's challenging. I think he's either as good as these other DPSs right now, or he's a little bit better. So I do think he is quite strong. I think he is definitely on the stronger side for DPSs. He gets a little bit inconsistent, having to stay in Bennett's circle. It makes playing him a little bit annoying, but it's not too bad. He's got really good tracking. I do find some really mobile enemies, you try and use his skill and he'll completely miss. This is most noticeable on the Magukenki, where you'll use his skill and it'll fling him up in the air, like the exploration thing, and then the Magukenki is way over there and now his skill's on cooldown. That's pretty annoying. But overall, like, I think he's a lot less buggy than Mualani. So although he doesn't hit quite the same optimal clears as Mualani does, at least for me, he is more consistent and he's not as buggy. For strictly damage, I still think that Arlecchino like slightly edges him out in overall damage. My Kinich is built quite well. I got a good crit ratio. I got lots of attack on this piece. Okay piece, not that great. Good sands, alright goblet, and good circlet. So not a crazy build, but overall the stat line ends up being quite good. For account value, I mean, it's hard to say. To max him out, you kind of want to get Emily, but you don't need it. There's some Furina teams that did as well. And even the Nahida team with Thrilling Tales did pretty well. You're probably going to want to use the Archon with him. So, like, I mean, there's like a niche support. He really wants Bennett. If you don't have another Bennett team, like Xiangling is free, Day you can get from the selector. Lots of people will, if you don't have Emily, lots of people will have Nahida or Furina or both. So I think he has enough options to be accessible enough for a free-to-play. So I think he has like a decent amount of value. And I think if you build him well, he can definitely kind of carry a team as long as he's with Bennett. Like, look at all the teams that cleared really well. Like, yeah, they have Emily or Furina or Nahida, but look at this. Mona Bennett Xiangling did so well. Dea Bennett Nahida did so well. So I think that there's like enough there that you can call him a good value character. He's a DPS that does bring up the stay of your account as long as you have Bennett free. If Bennett's already being used, like if you already have Arlecchino, kind of scary to get Kinich because now you've got 2 competing characters for Bennett. That's kind of annoying. But overall, yeah, I think his power probably puts him around the 4th best DPS. I'll have to test him with future Abysses because, again, this Abyss was so cringe. And I even had to do a few runs with other characters on the second side to compare him with. I did a bunch of Arlecchino, Mualani, Clorand runs. And yeah, so I think he's versus him with Mualani. I think Mualani has higher highs, but I think Kinich is more consistent. So if you value consistency, then Kinich is probably better. But they're different. They use completely different supports in a way. Like, they both want an off-field power applicator, which definitely, you know, Mualani's definitely going to be an off-field, not Mualani. Mavuika is definitely going to be an off-field power applicator. They both desperately want that. And they're both really good at single target. The other thing that Mualani has is better AoE. She can tag multiple enemies, and if they're close enough together, she can kind of do a lot of damage to both of them, whereas Kinich has to sort of burst down one, then the other. He does some AoE, but it's not a huge amount. But Mulaney is inconsistent enough, and her gameplay issues are more plentiful, that if you're annoyed by her, and if you don't want to do resets, like if that's like that inconsistency, Kinich is like way more consistent and consistently very good. So I think he's an excellent pull. One of the best DPSs you can go for in the game, probably. Especially, you know, thinking about that a lot that his teams are very comfy already, and you have the interruption resistance with the Dea team and healing with Bennett. That makes him overall probably more comfy than the likes of Arlecchino. So to some people, maybe he's even your second favorite DPS, their second best DPS when you include kind of comfort in that metric. Plus, he's great exploring. So I think if you want to get Kinich, definitely get him. I wouldn't pull him strictly for power, because I definitely expect the meta will evolve and change as Natlin goes on. But overall, really a big fan of him. Let me know with your thoughts. Let me know if you're going to get him. Take care. Bye for now.